Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where I talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Resident Alien. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, I'm curious how Harry's position on things would have played out this episode if it wasn't just for Asta's suspicions of him. Because, the whole conversation with Sahara only leaned into, certain suspicions she already had for Harry. Because she's had her ups and downs and doubts about him, knowing, right, you don't care enough about the rest of the human race, you only care about me, which is kind of a big deal, because it kind of puts a lot of pressure on her. But regardless, I thought it was interesting also, I love that whole Sahar thing where she does something, he's like, oh my god, you're the monster here. He's like, you sad, broken little girl. I was like, makes you wonder what she exactly said to him, and for him to have such a visceral reaction. It's hard to say, too, because sometimes they'll say stuff that's not that crazy, and he'll be like, take it back. He'll, some of, the child things that would be kind of insults, he, takes really personally, so. But Sahar's the one that brought up her concerns because she's like, he's not actually building a radio, he's building a bomb. And it's like, Asta's like, no, he is building a radio. And she's like, how can you be so sure? Because Sahar's seeing him for who he really is. It's like, the way he talks to them and stuff, it's like, oh, that's true to who he is. It's like, he doesn't care about the rest of us. Like, how can you really wholeheartedly believe him? And even Asta stops by and is like, oh, show me the radio and stuff like that. Because he's like, yeah, I'm here because I'm getting those flowers from my ship. Yeah, I'm gonna need them in the grand scheme of things for the radio. She's like, wait, you're gonna need flowers for the radio and stuff like that? And it's like, yeah. So I can see where her suspicions would rise in that moment, So she wants to, tag along and is like, oh, show me how the radio works and stuff like that, to the point he's like, why is she staring at me? Do I have a booger on my face or something? But she's like, yeah, you lied to me before saying it was a radio, when in actuality it's a bomb. How do I know you're not lying to me now? Once again, those suspicions were always already there, just Sahara just lit a fire in those sparks that were already there. So now she wants to go with her dad and Harry to go check out and make sure that this device is really what he says it is, because it's supposed to be everything has to align, because if he doesn't do it now at this very specific time, it's going to be an entire year before the time it's right again for them to, everything's aligned again for them to send out their message. So it was kind of supposed to only be the three of them, but more family tags along, so now which I love that Asta's cousin's thinking Harry and Asta, Asta's trying to get rid of her from him, so it's just so she can have some alone time with Harry. She's like, oh no, he's like, I know what's going on. She's like, no, that's not that. He's like, don't worry about it, cuz I got you, cuz, It was interesting too because talking to him, Harry was he had told Harry yeah, I know what it's like to basically feel like you don't he was saying yeah, you seem like you don't belong here or something like that, which made Harry it sunk in even more hearing him say that, because it's yeah, he's so far from home that he is here. So I just thought that was kind of interesting, and all that kind of influenced his decisions, and because he's spending time with Asta's family, and specifically the songs being played in the woods and how they respect nature, and talking about how obviously the world is dying, and for Harry that hits him because it's right, there are people who care about it, but even that's not enough. Humans are so self-destructive, they're going to kill this planet. I mean, that's why his people want to kill humans in the first place. It's yeah, we'll kill all the humans in an attempt to save not only the animals, but also everything else that's beautiful about this planet. Once again, why are you the arbiters that get to really decide that? Sure, that's still a whole conversation in itself. But Harry, especially because he saw that bison or whatever, it just made him solidified it even more for him. So it's cool. He's gonna try and find a middle ground of sorts. That solidified it in his mind of finding that middle ground, because it's cool, if I don't kill the humans now, killing the humans now, I save a lot of this planet. If I don't kill the humans, they're eventually going to kill themselves anyway. So he thinks, hey, I found the perfect solution. I'm telling my people, yeah, it seems yeah, we got this victory. I'm okay, what's going to be the rub of this? Because he's sending the message, and Asta's so happy. He's oh, thank you for doing it. He's right, telling my people to come here in 50 years. She's what? He's yeah, well, they had a timetable already, but now they have an even larger timetable, because this way you get to live out the rest of your human life and die, and then the rest of the planet can die. And I love the whole, like, oh, I'm angry right now, like, I'm pacing back and forth. Because he's like, right, where you would have had 50 years where maybe then we could have found some other way, now we only have maybe 50 days for all we know. But for Asta, it's just kind of like, it just, in her mind, it's just like, right, I guess I shouldn't have trusted you. Especially because she confided in her dad, like, her dad's like, oh, it shouldn't matter what I say or what I think. And it's like, cool. She's like, in my gut, I do trust Harry. He's like, that's good. Because at least one of us does. I'm like, you made matters worse, because she was already having her doubts because of what Sahar said. Now once again, I think they were already there, but Sahar like lifted those to the surface, and then you have her dad not making it any easier, where it's like, cool, you don't trust him either. So, oh, that's awesome, that's great. So, because for Asta still, it's like, why can't you get it through your head? It isn't just about me. And what about, like, she's trying to at the very least say, like, well, what about the people I care about? Because if she can get him to care about the people she cares about, then eventually that will sprout out into him potentially caring about other people on this planet. But it's still, it's kind of hard to punch through that. And I think it was kind of this beautiful thing when he was helping Sunny give birth to her child. And, obviously, like, you know, he's like, right, luckily I watched a YouTube video about this, so he was able to help in the end. But it was this beautiful thing where he sees, like, the community that's built around, like, people coming together for a childbirth, you know? I mean, obviously this is kind of a special occasion because, like, it's not always like that. But even when a child is born afterwards, families do gather. It's like, oh, like, families there typically, you know, for the birth, you know, it's usually, they're not always able to be in the room like that. But being surrounded by entire family like that when a baby is born, that's not how it works for his species. It's like, yeah, you kind of have to leave the baby alone because, like, the sac that the baby comes out of is poisonous. Plus, he references again on, yeah, like, we kind of throw our kids, like, very Spartan style out into the wilderness. So it's like, they don't have the same attachment, because his people are like, cool, like, go off on your own. Your survival instincts will kick in and you survive or you die. Whereas humans, they kind of look to their parents to guide them, to teach them, and be, you know, a metaphor that comes up in this episode, their lighthouse of sorts. And that's so, yeah, I think that's, interestingly enough, that changed Harry's perspective on a lot of stuff, because when he's seeing that, being there in that moment, having family around, hit Asta, because it made her, like, regret, like, giving up Jay, because she has to set, you know, boundaries and everything. But for the past 2 episodes, it's kind of like, it's like, oh, Darcy has a better relationship with Jay than me. And it's like, no, don't worry about it. It's like, oh, she has, like, a boyfriend or something like that. Maybe you should run a background check on Liv. I'm like, no, never mind. I'm going to respect boundaries and stuff, because it's like, right, at the very least, I might not be able to be Jay's mother, because when I gave her up, I kind of, like, lost a little bit of that. But it's like, at the very least, I want to be somebody in the room. And I was like, that's a beautiful line. And Harry was like, yeah, remember, like, when you found out where I was, like, you opened up about how you felt guilty about giving up Jay. And at the time, he's like, I didn't really understand that. He's like, I am starting to understand now why you felt guilty. And I thought that was a beautiful thing of, like, you know, slowly but surely, like, Harry has made progress as a human, but he's making even more progress now. And I think this is opening up that pathway to him being, once again, caring more and more about other people, recognizing, like, oh, there's some certain things. It's because he had his view on children just being like, because how children are dealt with and raised here on Earth is way different than on his planet. So, but looking at their, you know, the way children just are supposed to, at the very least, have their parents be their guide, their defenders, their biggest fans, essentially, like, your parents being there to support you when they should be able to. Like, they should be able to help mold you and grow you and help you out. Push when it's time for you to go out to the world. They should have been able to do their job to prepare you and, you know, be there for you. And it's interesting because obviously we parallel that with Darcy's story, because obviously she's hitting it off with that guy Elliot, and they are, like, very flirtatious, and Liv is like, yo, go for it, you know, because he likes her for who she is. It's like, oh, he's heard about her and he loves all these things about her. And I love that line of, you who you were doesn't define basically who you are. So you just because like, oh, you're like a skier, like it doesn't, like that doesn't have to 100% define you. But in her mind, it kind of does, because she will always be like, oh, I'm the one that was on my way to success. And it all came crashing down the moment I got hurt, and I'm stuck in my hometown, and like a lot of that, like a lot of her own, like she kind of has some confidence issues, because, and it seems like her parents add fuel to that fire, because that's why she invited Liv in the first place, was just so she wouldn't have to be alone dealing with her parents. And even her parents being like, oh, like this and that. And then even the fact is of like, oh, trying to get Liv to hook her up with someone. It's just kind of like, okay, guys, it's just like, no, I'm doing good, I'm doing great. And it's just like, they feel the need. That's what her biggest fear was. They'd make me, they try to fix my life. And in that moment, you see it. Like, she feels like a little girl in front of her parents again. Like, I'm a full-grown woman. You guys can't just be happy for me because you're like, oh, this is wrong about your life, so this and that. They're like, oh, remember when she used to be so determined? Like, oh, whatever you believed in and whatever you want, you always went for it. Because they feel like, oh, you're kind of slumming it now. Like, it's like, right, like, but her life should be her life. She'd be able to live it without, like, your judgment. But it's just like, in that moment, she just feels like a little girl. Like, I think that's why I probably, like, her success was like a double-edged sword, because it's like, yes, and then now that, you know, you went through what you went through, and now your family just feels like, you should kind of get back out there on that horse. Like, you should find, you know, oh, we could hook you up with this and that. It's just like, I'm still just a little girl having to, like, bend to what my parents want rather than what I want. In that moment, she did the magic trick, and I was like, is she actually going to successfully perform it? It's like, no, the point wasn't to do that. So she knocks everything down, flips everyone off, and bounces. And, leaves, and she went to go meet up with Elliot afterwards, and he's there waiting with the rose, and she didn't go in because, you know, I like I said, the beautiful metaphor of like the lighthouse, like, you know, parents not there to guide you. It's like like I said, I think they put a lot of pressure on her to do this and do that, and they weren't the supportive hand that they could have been. You know, it's just like, right, like, rather than being like, okay, let her live her own life, it's just nitpicking of like, oh, this is wrong about your life. Let us do this and this and this and that. Oh, remember who you were back then. And like I said, that's why I feel like a lot of who she was has always been determined by her parents. Like, because it's almost like you're like, who you are right now isn't good enough. Like, it can make you feel like, oh, like, what's wrong with me? You know, I have value. People like me for who I am, but it's like, right, when your own parents are just like, yeah, but I get it. Your parents want the best for you, but it's almost like, do you really want what's best for me? Or are you just trying to dictate because you want my life to be what you want it to be? Like, it can't just be what I want, you know? I can't be in the process of figuring things out. Like, you know, this is, like I said, I think that's why she is the fun time that she is, because she's overcompensating because a lot of stuff she's dealing with beneath the surface. So I just thought that was an interesting parallel to make, and it's sad because like Elliot definitely likes her and she likes him, but she's scared to like kind of take that step forward because it's just kind of like, it's like my own parents don't like me the way I am, and they're too busy trying to fix me. Like, I think maybe in her head it might be, well, you won't like me either. Like, why kind of like go for something, like, you know? And it's interesting too how that parallels with Mike, which I love that Judy shows up and it's like, oh yeah, she I guess because you guys dance, and Mike is like, we didn't dance. She danced on me, and then like she's writing down a number and stuff. But I love that she like. Maybe I'm wrong. Didn't she write her number on her own hand? Isn't that what Judy did? Maybe she wrote down Mike's. I thought the whole point was like she was writing, because no one said anything, so that's why I'm like, oh, maybe I'm being stupid. Because I thought they were trying to say like, oh, she wrote her own number down, and it's like, see? But it's like, no, she probably wrote Mike's. I don't know. That's what my immediate thought was, but I thought that was kind of interesting. But he does go on a date later on, and this problem is the date doesn't go well because his date starts asking questions about him. And she's like, oh yeah, how'd you end up here? He's like, yeah, I ended up in this town because of his job, losing his best friend. And it's like, yeah, people in this town not knowing when to leave well good enough alone. And so that was actually kind of heartbreaking seeing him just kind of storm away, and even Liv wanted to check on him. You know, because she was like, oh, because she's the one that kind of convinced him, like, oh, you need to kind of go out. Maybe you should give Judy a shot or something like that. That would be interesting if they ended up being kind of an interesting. I'd be interested to check that out to find out like whether or not they'd end up being an interesting couple or not. I think they would be. Judy and Mike, like I don't know, like, but we've touched on it a little bit, but I think we're going to get even more of it. You know, maybe later on down the season, everything in between, like what happened with Mike and how he ended up here and everything. I think we'll dive into a little bit more of that this season. So. But I like there's, you know, once again, like these stories are parallel to each other, but like it is kind of that, you know, not having that guidance, kind of feeling a little lost. It's kind of like the big thing in this episode. Everyone feeling a little lost. Because even Asta, like after everything with Jay, I think, with the baby and everything, and maybe just all this stuff with Harry. I don't know if the stuff with Harry, like, set this off or just the baby stuff with Sunny and making her thinking about Jay. She ended up, I think it has to more so be about that. And I think it's kind of a sad thing. She ended up running to Jimmy. Now, granted, it makes sense. Jimmy is Jay's dad and everything. He's still kind of the abusive piece of crap he is, but, you know, maybe he can better himself. I just hope him and Asta don't get back together. I think that would be bad for her because, you know, but, you know, maybe he has changed and maybe he can change. So we'll see how things kind of go from there. But I think it's just like, right, you had to talk to someone that would kind of understand to some extent, because it's like, right, he knows Jay's out there now, and also like, you know, I'm interested to see where that kind of goes. Whether she like leans on him, was it just in that vulnerable moment, or will it be a continuous thing? I don't know. But another element to this episode is the whole situation with Liv, because Mike had picked up her dress. It's like, yeah, I went to the dry cleaners, and then like they handed me this. She's like, did you take mine? And she's like, no, why would I do that? And she's like, I would remember if I didn't. I was like, interesting. So Liv's going to be, because I was wondering, like, I guess eventually, like, there would be cracks in the memory loss, but I guess not. I guess it's kind of a perfect memory loss that, like, once those memories are basically shifted and gone, there's no getting them back, maybe, like, no matter what. I don't know if they still exist in your brain somewhere, but Liv is listening to a radio thing talking about being abducted, like memory loss and stuff like that, which is another element because the general's back to our thing of, like, abducting people. I guess David's the only one still in the area because Lisa's with the general. So I guess it's like, yeah, David's the one that's kind of lost and on his own. So that's definitely going to be interesting. Not unless he found his way back eventually, but last time we saw him was last episode and he was fiddling with the signal and stuff. So I guess he's trying to get picked up and like he doesn't want to kind of be out there on his own out in the cold. Because especially because it's like, well, the ass whooping that Ben and Kate dealt him, plus the fact is that probably kind of wanted by some authorities and stuff, so maybe that's why he's kind of out in the cold on his own. But we'll see. Maybe he actually did find his way back to the general and Lisa. Maybe not. We'll see. But the general is collecting people, trying to find out, like, people who, like, oh, are these people's stories real? Because she's trying to figure out, like, okay, I guess, like, these are people, like, did they have legitimate abduction stories or what? And obviously she spends a little time with Ethan this episode, and she's like, oh, show me your true form. He's like, this is my true. He's like, oh, people like you. He's like, Midwesterners? And she talks about, now we kind of, I don't think she ever mentioned this last season. The reason why she's so determined to prove like aliens exist and everything, because her and her father saw what they saw and people thought they were crazy. In fact, her dad, he's like, yeah, he snuffed out his own life. So he killed himself because of like the ridicule and everything he suffered because people thought he was crazy. She's doing this not only to prove aliens exist, but just to prove her father right. Like, no, my dad was right. He was right. He wasn't crazy. So that's a big personal motivation for her. So stabbing Ethan in the hand and being like, cool, thought that would be enough to make you show your true form. Okay, so, but they did see the signal Harry ended up getting, which we'll get to in a second. So they ended up seeing that. So in their mind, they're probably thinking like, oh, like probably not like, oh, Ethan isn't the alien. It's probably like, oh, there's another alien on this planet. It's probably like how they'll probably look at it and justify it maybe. So we'll see how that shapes up. And but Harry did receive a signal, but it was telling him like, cool, you need to go to New York. Well, it's a phone number from New York. So that might be confirming what I thought before. Like, there might be other people, not only Harry, on this planet. Like, was there someone else that came to this planet and failed to do their mission? Or Is there a subsect of his people that are actually on this planet? Like, I'm curious, like, what that's about. Like, why specifically? Not unless it's like a New York phone number you have to call and they're going to bounce their, so you can actually talk to them. Like, are they going to bounce the signal off and hit this particular New York phone number? I think it has to be a thing of like, no, there must be, whoever lived saw all those years ago, 20-some years ago, maybe that's the same person that's here. Maybe it's connected to the person that came all those years ago that the general saw, whatever the case may be. It's definitely going to be interesting to find out what that's all about. Especially now that, you know, once again, Harry's feelings are constantly in flux and he's kind of changing and growing little by little and becoming more and more human, which might be an issue when it comes to his people. We'll see. But another interesting element to this episode is Ben and Kate. Ben was like, obviously anti Jessup and everything. The moment his wife brought him to talk, yeah, it's from Jessup, and he spits it out, which I love that he digs it out of the trash. Now, at the very least, he chose the one that was covered up, like it was still in a box. He didn't go for the one that he just straight up threw away. So, gotta speak volumes there. But, you know, it's because it's like, yeah, this town's constantly shitting on patients. Like, why should we work with them? It's like, she's like, let's just go. At the very least, if you don't like anything, you could just use it as kind of fuel for like the commercial and stuff like that. And he's like, yeah, that's a good idea, because she's basically saying like, oh, maybe we can learn a thing or two picking up from them. So Ben's just kind of like blah blah blah. It's like, oh, here's these straws, and it's like, oh, don't worry, these straws won't end up in turtles. And then it's just kind of like, well, what if the turtles are on land before like the straws break, like go to biodegradable or something like that? And it's like, oh, before they like go away. So it's like, yeah, what about the turtles on land? Like, he's nitpicking everything. Then they're like, oh, bring us this water. He's like, fine, I'll have ice water. It's like, yeah, but if you add ice to it, you can't actually taste the water. And it's just like, he's so annoyed with it. And then the mayor stops by, and Kate just want to give him initially, like, you know, it's like give him some leeway, but then he shits on patience, because I love that even Ben was like, you know, everything was great here before the murder. He's like, well, then there's the 59 miners, and then there's that church burning down in the 80s. So it's like, yeah, the town's definitely had its own issues. I mean, once again, that relative of theirs where it's like, oh, cool, he didn't die in the mines because he called in sick because he was at a whorehouse where his wife found him and killed him. That whole ancestor thing. What was that, a grandfather or great-grandfather thing? I can't remember now. But either way. But then he starts shitting on the 59 is what the Jessup mayor does. And obviously for Kate, it's like, no, don't say that. No, that's about sacrifice and stuff like that. People willing to sacrifice themselves for each other is a very inspiring story. And then just immediately she's like, and your water sucked. Blah, like she went off because she, you know, and it's like, and Ben's like, oh, I thought we were, she was like, nah, that douchebag, screw him. So it's like, yeah, Kate's more on his side now, and Ben's kind of like, yeah, I'm not the only one that hates this guy. Cool. So it's going to be interesting to see how that fuels them going forward with, like, this mayor beef that's going on. Well, town versus town type of thing. So I'm curious to see how that plays out, how that eventually escalates. So I'm really excited to see where all this ultimately ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.